Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. We're in today's webinar, we're going to be talking about self-service and how to become a data-driven organization. We'll be hearing from Wayne Eckerson, who's president of Eckerson Group and has over 30 years as a thought leader in data and analytics. Eckerson Group is a boutique consultancy, and we help our customers get more value out of their data. Before we dive in, let's take care of a little bit of housekeeping items. First of all, we recommend that you put AirMeet in full screen mode. You can use the questions, the Q&A tab for your questions, and we definitely encourage you to post questions along the way, and we'll be monitoring that tab and trying to answer them as we go. You can use the chat tab to contact our admin if you're having any problems. Also, of course, to chat amongst yourselves. And at the end after the webinar, we'll be sending the slides and the recording of the event. So we have a terrific set of resources on self-service on our website under our topic page on self-service. So there are a number of articles that you can take in at your leisure that expands upon this topic. So yeah, and now without further ado, hand it over to Wayne and we'll dive right in.
Great. Thank you, Jay. That was Jay Pichonera. He's one of our consultants here focused on data architecture, data engineering. So thank you, Jay, for the intro. I do want to say we've got more topics up on our website besides self-service. We've got data strategy and data products that we've done the last couple of months. And we're adding new topics that are resources that we're culling from our archives, as well as partners and new stuff that we're creating. So go up there. It's a rich resource for all of you on these very important topics. Right. So self-service is something that I've been studying, researching, writing about, consulting about for over 20 years. And, on the surface, it seems pretty darn straightforward. It's a win-win proposition. The business users get what they want, how they want it, when they want it, without having to wait in line for IT or the data team to deliver it to them. They get better tools, and as a result, they, can make better, faster decisions. And the IT, on the other hand, they finally get happy users. They're tired of dealing with disgruntled users who are tired of waiting in line for weeks, if not months, to get simple data requests fulfilled. So if they can get users to kind of do their own reports and build their own data pipelines, they get to offload some of these lower end tasks and focus theoretically on more strategic things. So this is the theory of self-service, and it seems so easy, but in reality, as I've discovered, and maybe you, it's really quite difficult and challenging to do self-service right. The big problem that I see with self-service is that you empower users with these tools, but unless you apply proper governance and alignment throughout the organization, they just flood the organization with reports, most of which are variations on a theme and contain conflicting data and metrics, making users even more confused than they were before, and prompting a lot of them to go to the data team and request custom reports so they can be sure that the data in them is the right data and that they can trust it. So what this creates is more reports, more confusion, more backlog, increased cost, increased risk. No one is happy. In fact, people are less happy. Things have gotten worse since before you implemented self-service. So this is a real problem. There's basically no standards or governance in this environment. It's literally a Tower of Babel. Everybody's talking, but no one's communicating. So if you've had that issue, we'd love to hear from you. And by the way, as Jay mentioned, we'd like to make this conversational. So I'm going to stop after the next slide and take any comments or questions from you, the audience. So what has been the solution to self-service? Well, people have always thought, well, if we just make BI tools easier, we'll empower users and they'll get what they want, how they want it, when they want it. And vendors have been more than happy to jump on this bandwagon, as you can see from this chart, which kind of depicts the evolution of business intelligence. data management tools. The vendors, starting in the 1990s, released tools geared really to power users, it's desktop reporting and OLAP tools, web-based BI tools, visual analysis tools like Tableau and Power BI. And more recently, they've released casual user tools that use a search paradigm, or they've embedded reports and BI functionality inside other applications so users don't have to context switch. And now with Gen AI, we're going to change the whole interface to BI so users can just talk to their BI tool or write prompts that enable them to do whatever they want, even create a dashboard from scratch, theoretically. But I think, as I've kind of argued, this may not be the true answer to the dilemma of self-service. In fact, in my opinion, tools come at the end of the whole process. And in fact, the reason self-service is so hard is that you have to do everything else right in your data environment before you are ready to implement self-service and have it succeed and flourish. You first need to know who your users are. And I'm always amazed when I go in to consult with organizations. They have no idea who their users are, especially the power users, the data analysts, the data scientists, especially the data analysts and the pseudo data engineers, or citizen data engineers, probably a nicer way of putting that. Those are the key people in every department and business unit. And you really need to know who they are. If you don't know who you're serving, you're certainly not going to do a good job of serving them. After that, you need the right data architecture, the right operating model, the right data governance, the right project management, product management, right literacy program. And then finally, if you bake the tools on top of all of that, you have a chance of succeeding at self-service. So why don't I stop there and get any comments or questions from you, the audience? And Jay's going to be the person who interjects those questions. So Jay, are there any questions out there?
Not yet, but I do have one for you, Wayne. So you look at this list of things that you have to get right before you can have self-service, and that's quite a mountain to climb, and it's very definitely, it seems on the surface at least, at odds with like an agile approach. So how do you chip away at this and be able to gain success without having to boil the ocean?
Well, that's a great question. And I guess I don't want to insinuate that you have to wait on self-service till the very end of this list. Hopefully you can make good progress on each of these areas. And the key here, I think, is that you have to have a really robust, actionable data strategy that maps all of this out, shows how it interlocks, shows how it's going to progress, what resources you need, what technology you need. And that should be a 3, maybe 5-year roadmap, right? So you know where you're going. And if you've got that, then by all means, move ahead with self-service, because you're going to be doing the right things. And obviously, you might want to start small with a trusted group of power users to start, right? Or executives if you want to empower them right off the bat. But yes, a data strategy. In fact, when we do our actionable data strategies for clients, this is what we deliver to them essentially is how do you do each of these things and how are they related, so that in 3 years, you're on top of all of this and you're making headway in empowering users and reducing that backlog or eliminating it all entirely.
We do have we do have a question here, which is kind of right in line with what we're talking about. Is how do you communicate this to end users who don't understand the path to self-service?
Yeah, well, I think the data strategy is one way to do that. It ideally is a communications vehicle for your data team to get them on the same page and get them marching in the same direction. To your executives who have to buy in and fund any additions to the program in terms of people or technology. And then, to the rest of the employees of your organization to show them that, hey, this is where we're going and this is how it's going to affect you. This is what you need to do and when. And this is what's going to be the upshot for you. And this is why you should do it as well. What's in it for them, right? They're not going to cross the bridge to do something differently if you don't give them real good incentives and don't penalize them for doing the right thing. In other words, don't make it hard to do the right thing. Make it easier to do the right thing, and that should help move their behavior in the right direction. Also, it's important to kind of get to that tipping point of adoption, right? So if this is why you start small, right? You start with a group that is going to work with you to deliver governed self-service. In fact, I should say that we should never just say self-service, because self-service without governance is just going to create chaos. So, give them enough reason to move, and I think you'll have success. And communicate that and show that that others are doing this. And what I've learned from research from academics is that if you can reach 20% of a population, a strongly networked population, the other 80% will come along. So 20%, 21% is the tipping point in a strongly networked organization. So we always say you have to appeal to the head, the heart, and the herd if you're going to change behavior in an organization. So what I'm talking about in that last bit was appealing to the herd, right? Appealing to the heart is giving them an incentive, a reason to do this that might be bigger than themselves. Like, this is good for the organization. This could make your life easier. This is where we need to go. So let's get on board and champion this. So that's appealing to the heart. And appealing to the head really is how's it going to affect them and what do they need to do in the short term?
Yeah, we have a couple of comments, right along lines with what you said. One of which is, in my opinion, the lack of a solid, consistent, governed semantic model is a major gap for true self-service. With a follow-up that says, that a tool is merely a mirror to the underlying data chaos without a presentation / semantic layer. So
yeah, semantic layer is important.
Everybody's speaking the same language.
Yeah, that's a critical part of the architecture, which we'll dive into.
That's what we got so far.
All right, so let's move on. I'm going to go through each of these at a very high level, but just to kind of get our feet wet. So this is a user classification framework that I've used for a long time, and it still holds up, which is great. The percentages may be changing a little bit, but there's two big buckets of users. I call them casual users and power users. The casual users represent 90% of your employees, and most of those are data consumers. And they basically just take what you give them and consume it as is. It's like 60% of your people. It's executives, it's managers, it might be some of your customers and suppliers. Then there's data explorers, who are data consumers at heart, but they're a little bit more ambitious when it comes to data. So they don't want to just take things as is. They want to modify what you give them. Sometimes they even want to create something from scratch using something they built in Excel, right? But they want to transfer that to their new environment. So these people are a little bit more ambitious. They're actually really hard to support. And I think this percentage is growing over time. So how do you make it really easy for them to do what they need to do without getting lost and throwing their hands up, right? So the power users are the 10% of your organization, but they're the people who get paid and hired to crunch data day in, day out, right? So the bigger group are your data analysts. That's about 8% of your employees. And this group actually has multiple layers to it now. I think this has evolved over time. You have your typical visual analysts, who are using Tableau or Power BI, who are creating reports and dashboards. Then you have your so-called analytics engineers, kind of a new term for people who are doing pretty intensive data prep out in the business domains. They may be using a package tool like Alteryx, or they may be even using DBT, or in some rare cases, maybe writing Python as well. And then the other 2% are data scientists, right, who are trained as data scientists and are creating ML and AI models. And what I say is that the casual users want silver service, but the power users want self-service. So self-service really is the ability to create something from scratch. Find the data, get the data, mash the data together, build a report, do the analysis, create the presentation, right? That's what power users are paid to do. Casual users are not paid to do that. They have other jobs, right? And just managing data is really not part of the job description necessarily. But they need to use data to do their jobs, right? So what they really want is silver service, and I define that as, delivering information to them on a silver platter, which means when they get into their environment, the data they need is right there in front of them in the format that they need it. And then they can do their analysis from there without much heavy lifting on their part. So silver service implies that the data team actually needs to go in and understand who these people are and what their requirements are and build out the views or the semantic layer, which, by the way, the power users will use too, not always, but often, that will help them, especially the explorers, navigate to what they need to do. So I ask clients, do you have an inventory of your users? Do you know who your power users are in every department, every business unit? And I think that's really the starting point, because once you know who your users are, then you can design your architecture around them, as we'll see, your literacy program around them, governance, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the starting point. Okay, so let's talk about architecture. So here, very high level architecture. I've mapped those roles into the architecture, because your architecture, if designed well, is going to give users the data they need in the form and format they need it. So it's quite frictionless, quite effortless, right? So your data consumers, they're just going to access the output, right? The reports and dashboards. Your data explorers, they will use the tool and open up the semantic layer or the model behind the tool, whether that's a semantic layer, a database view, data mart, OLAP cube, and they'll start to maybe bring in additional dimensions or additional metrics that maybe didn't make it into the final dashboard or report. They may even upload some of their own, right, and create a custom view for themselves. Your data analysts, they have, I call a triumvirate of tools. It consists of a data visualization tool, a data catalog to go find the data and evaluate it, and data prep tool to mash it up. And they'll use that semantic view oftentimes, but sometimes they may want to go right to the warehouse or the lake house where the data is a little bit more granular, where it's been cleaned, it's been integrated, it's been mastered, and they've been given access to it, hopefully. Sometimes we call this the trusted zone or the refined zone. Now, sometimes these data analysts will want to go elsewhere because they oftentimes bump up against the boundaries of whatever model or zones that we create for them. And that's kind of the challenge of working with power users, that you need to let them go where they need to go, but in a governed way. Your data scientists, they want that clean integrated data, but sometimes they want data that's not been touched. So they'll go to the raw zone. So, they want data that's unfiltered by someone else's conceptions of how the data should be integrated or formatted at some time. So I think it's important that whatever you build out in your architecture is meeting the needs of your different personas in the organization.
Yeah, we have an observation here from one of our participants. He says, in my organization, it's the executives who are asking for self-service. And I think that kind of, goes to what you're talking here about, Wayne, which is that what self-service looks like depends on the nature of the user, right? There's often an inverse relationship between the sophistication of the person, of the question being asked in a business context, with the data skill or the data sophistication, right? So business executives have really important, sophisticated business questions, but they're not the ones who are going to be able to pull the data together to get them. So, that's really in that silver service realm.
Yeah, so I would bet that a lot of those executives are frustrated because they ask simple questions and they can't get an answer to them, right? So like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm just going to do it myself at night or on the weekend. So they would be data explorers, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, they're pretty hard to support because they do have questions that might be hard to answer with, basic knowledge about how to manipulate data and use the tools. So they are a hard group to support, but it's also a symptom that you haven't designed your architecture and your environment right, too. If they're searching around for data that's not at their fingertips, something's wrong, right? So 80% of the time, they should be able to go to a standard dashboard or report and pull out that data that they need. Or in today's world, with search tools or Gen AI, be able to ask a question and get the answer to it. Right. If they're not getting that, then they're going to take matters into their own hands.
Yeah. And often one question leads to another. So, how do you anticipate the follow-on questions? For example, sales are down in the Northeast region, right? Okay, that's good to know. But really the question is why?
Yeah. So what we're doing now with some of our clients is helping them create KPI driver trees.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a balanced scorecard. So you start with a business objective like gross sales, reduce costs, and then you define other objectives that drive that outcome, right? And you create a hierarchy of these things. And for each objective, you create a metric associated with it. You do some statistical analysis to make sure that your drivers are actually drivers and not lagging indicators, right? And then you create this tree, you put it in a dashboard, and now executives should, in one glance, be able to see what's running the company, or where the weak spots are, and be able to drill down and do root cause analysis themselves, right? Because all the data is right there, it's all correlated, it's all integrated, and it's all visualized.
Yeah.
So
we have another comment here which is that what we need is an AI on top of reports / dashboards to go search and find answers instead of the user going to multiple dashboards to get the information they need.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. It probably sounds like that a vendor would probably say that, and if it works, that would be great. But I would also say that, if the data team's doing its job, every department should have an operational dashboard that's going to answer 80% of the people's day-to-day questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's that last 20% where they can use that AI, Gen AI, which is kind of like a surrogate data analyst, right? If your company hasn't invested in data analysts or enough of them, then AI is a great substitute, right, for that analyst. It's like an analyst in your back pocket, right? So, and I think that's real promising use of Gen AI, but I don't think that absolves the data team from going in and understanding the requirements of each group that they're supporting and making sure that the users of that group at their fingertips don't have to do much work, don't have to spend hours or nights or weekends piecing together data from multiple dashboards. There should be one place they can go to get most of the data, 80%, 60 to 80%, we'll say, of their answers answered. So I just don't see that a lot, which is startling to me.
One comment here that says, if your company hasn't invested in analysts, it probably hasn't invested in analytics and engineers, data modelers, etc. Good luck throwing AI at that. Yeah.
Well, it's funny that the number of analysts, you can take that two ways, I think. Either you have a lot of analysts because the data doesn't work in your organization, or your data team is too small. So things aren't working at the enterprise level. So companies just take, managers and business unit leaders take matters in their own hands and hire their own data analysts. Or you could say, if the data team is doing its job well, there's less need for data analysts out in the business units because users can get 80% of their questions answered by going one place and looking for it. So yeah, it's ironic. Typically, we see companies with lots of data analysts because the business unit leaders can't get the data they need to do their jobs. Should we move on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we've covered know thy users. We've covered the right architecture that maps users to the architecture, which I think you ought to have. You ought to be thinking user-driven data architecture, right? We don't say that term too often. The next thing where a lot of companies get tangled up in their underwear is the operating model, which basically is how are you organizing yourself for success? Not just the enterprise data and analytics team, but all the people in the organization who are using data to do their jobs or supporting people with data. So I've come up with this pretty high-level framework here. And, I've written some reports that drill down on this, but you've got the blue team, that's the enterprise data and analytics team. You've got the red team, these are the business users out in the domains. And then you have this purple domain, purple layer that we've called purple people, right? But I think this can be institutionalized in an operating model because the best solutions, the best support comes from people who have technical knowledge about the data, but also domain knowledge. And so they straddle both of these worlds. So how you create this purple layer, I think, is critical to your success as a data organization, right? Then there's many ways to do it. Traditionally, we've had business analysts, right? Or relationship managers, which are glorified, more senior business analysts, people who go out and collect requirements. They probably have, they're assigned to one or two domains or more. And their job is to understand where the business is going, what they need, and bring it back and translate it for the technical team. But there's other ways to do this. You can have tiger teams to do this, which are cross-functional, cross-trained small groups of developers who are assigned to a specific business unit for 6 months or so to solve their problems. And yeah, there's agile teams. A lot of times those tiger teams work in an agile fashion. We have centers of excellence that kind of straddle these two worlds, right? So, and this is very culturally based, how you do this purple layer. But it's really important to bring the technical expertise down into the domain. I guess today we're talking a lot about data mesh, right? Where the domains are actually building out their own data products, and that's great. So this purple layer would actually be in the domain, right? But however it's constructed, I think that the flows between these are the same. So you see the big blue arrow at the top. What does the enterprise data team do? Well, on the right, you see its job is to build and maintain the enterprise data platform and all shared data assets. And if there's a strategic enterprise solution that needs to be built, well, that's the only team that's going to be able to do that. But in relationship to the purple layer, their job is to really oversee, train, and coach the domain developers. Whether they're part of their team or the domain team, it doesn't really matter, right? And I love this last word here in that first bullet, deputize. That came from one of our clients who developed an educational program and developed standards and trained the domain developers in the departments how to build dashboards and pipelines in a standard way that wouldn't break data conformity, right? So they deputize these people out in the domains to do stuff that they otherwise would have to do. I thought that was wonderful way of describing it. So the enterprise data team, really, I think going forward, more of a center of excellence. They're establishing standards. They're documenting best practices. They try to codify those standards and build them into the data platforms and tools that are used out in the business units through templates and wizards and other things, so that the users are building things in a standard way without even knowing it, and it's making their jobs easier. So instead of having to write a lot of code to do stuff like slowly changing dimension or surrogate keys or things like that, it's actually just baked in, and they don't even have to do anything. So on the flip side, going from the red to the purple, the business domains, they need to be ready and spend time to express their business needs and requirements. And they need to double down on governance, right? Because this is not something the data team can do. They need to define business terms first and foremost. And then they need to participate in the governance program as stewards and owners and help manage data quality and privacy and things like that. That's really something, a responsibility of the business. That purple layer, I think, is where you need to focus your attention, and how the enterprise team supports that purple layer. That's the key to the right operating model.
Yeah. So we have a comment here that I think aligns with what you're talking about. There's a much more efficient way to operate, though. The most effective analytics teams I've seen were always relatively small and composed of specialists. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, specialists with domain knowledge is a very powerful combination. So
yeah,
if they don't have domain knowledge, they waste weeks trying to understand what the business needs and wants, right? So I do agree with the small cross-functional specialists, right? But they need to live and breathe the domain that they've been assigned to. So yeah, unless that happens, I think it's just going to bog down.
Yeah. Then we have another question, kind of a big one, which is Power BI the ideal tool for implementing self-service?
I don't know if there's an ideal tool. You have to work with what they give you. Power BI has a lot of power in it to build out models, which is in the desktop version. I believe now with Microsoft Fabric, you can do that. You're starting to be able to do that in the Fabric itself, not on the desktop. So yeah, I think if it's governed, I think Power BI is a wonderful tool to implement self-service. And the people who are using Power BI to build out stuff are doing it in alignment with enterprise standards. I don't think it really matters what tools you're using, to be honest with you. I mean, you can do this in Excel, even though we're trying to get away from that,
Right.
But
yeah, and there's another comment here that's basically saying, well, you do analytics with the tools you have, not the tools you want, to kind of paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, right? But here's a question: how critical is a BI team to the success of self-service? At my company, we have a centralized data team, mostly full of AEs that serve ops and analysts directly. No party directly responsible for maintaining standards and cleanliness in our BI tool.
Well, I think what the question is getting to is, what I often see in corporations, this blue team is just the enterprise data team, data architects, data engineers. And this purple team is actually the BI team or the analytics team. And their job is to go out and solicit requirements from the business domains.
Yeah.
And bring that in and build it, right? Build it for the users if they need it built for them, working in concert with the data team on the back end. The problem I see is a lot of times these BI teams, they start to ignore the data team and they become silos in and of themselves and exacerbate the problem instead of create the alignment that's required.
We also have a question that asks, would you say that security around tools is critical?
Absolutely. In fact, the more work we do with clients, the more that's coming front and center to make sure, because of all the regulations, to make sure we're managing sensitive data properly and avoiding embarrassing data breaches.
Yeah, I would pose a question to you, going back to your point about appealing to the heart, the head, and the herd, right? There's nothing particularly sexy about security, and yet it's so critical. So how can you appeal to the heart and the herd I mean, the head part, I think, is pretty obvious. Why do you have security from an empirical and intellectual point of view is pretty obvious. But how do you make that a visceral feeling for people that they're willing to get on board with it and support it and make it a part of how they operate?
Yeah, well, that's a good segue to the right governance, right? Governance is a hard one, right? Because if it's not implemented properly, people see it as Big Brother. It's impinging on them. It's going to slow them down, make them do extra work, extra steps to get done what they used to do much more quickly. So increasingly we try to counsel organizations create lightweight data governance, just enough governance, right, for the use case at hand, within a framework, right, of a data governance council. Okay, that's prioritizing needs. And I'd have to say data access is, well, there's, if I was to look at all of our clients, defining business terms, and data quality, those two are probably tied for the top things that need to be governed, followed by data access, right? Who gets access to what parts of the architecture and what data? And probably the fourth one is what you're looking at here, which is, especially in the era of self-service tools that generate reports, you need report governance process. And this is kind of an example from a client where they had this fairly elaborate process. It was agile. It had SLAs for response times to users who wanted to make a change to something that was a report that was being governed, whether it was an enterprise report or a departmental report. And if the report passed muster on a business risk level and a technical level, it got this stamp or seal of approval. And the seal of approval proved to be a huge change agent, because business users, especially executives, wouldn't look at a report unless it had that seal on it. And so, given that dynamic, kind of forced all the developers and data analysts, power users to get on board and go through this process because they wanted their work to be consumed on a broader basis. So this is one aspect of governance that you're looking at here, report governance. But as I mentioned, I think we counted up our data governance team. There's about 12 to 15 different things that you can govern in your data environment, probably maybe more. And one of the first things that we help companies do is prioritize what you're going to govern, because you can't do it all at once, for sure. So should we move on?
Yeah, I think so. I've got a bit to cover. We're at 10:40 at this point.
So. Yeah, let's keep moving on. So I'll do the next two together because they're kind of related. Mostly the data space has been, if users aren't empowered, then you're kicking off projects more or less. Or you could be going through a backlog and meeting individual user needs, but a lot of the data team's effort and time is spent on projects, right? So we find a lot of organizations have difficulty managing those projects right from the get-go, right? So what's your intake process, right? How are you triaging? How are you reviewing? How are you approving? How are you monitoring projects that have been approved, right? How are you communicating with the users who are making the requests, who are part of the project team, right? So there's a lot of things to think there. And there tend to be a lot of projects, especially if you don't have self-service. So we've seen some companies do a real nice job of fast tracking the smaller things so that you're more responsive to the users. So this is kind of a framework that we created for one client to help map out what was going on and with recommendations for how to do it better. Now, closely related to this is product management, which is where a lot of data teams are going now. Instead of just building projects or delivering projects, they're building products, which theoretically have, a lifespan of their own and continually evolve and get improved upon, and are managed by a product team headed by a product owner and product manager, who do the all-important job of defining what the product is, who the target customers are, what are their requirements, and what are we going to build to meet those requirements. That's probably the most significant change in how we go out and build solutions from the past, right? Then compared to the past. So once the product has been defined, then it gets passed over to the transition to the development team to build it out. It gets then packaged, which means you wrap the metadata around it so users can evaluate it independently of anyone talking to them about it. And that packaging is critical if you're going to put that product in a data marketplace, which I would recommend. If you're going down the data product route, and you're going to have multiple data products, more than a dozen, you probably need a data marketplace internally focused where you can put these products so people can find them and evaluate them and decide if they want them. And then be able to right then and there transact them. So in other words, to find a subscription for it that delivers that product to them on a regular basis. Of course, governance is key part of that. And a lot of people think that if we just deliver data products, they're going to be more trustworthy than a regular data asset. Well, that's only true if you govern them, right? And I think the one thing about a product is that we can now attach, or it's implied that you attach some kind of a contract with it, with service level agreements. Not that we couldn't do that in the past, but it's now kind of part of the process, what customers expect. And then we want to provision that product to a marketplace. And we're starting to see the emergence of these internal data marketplace platforms coming from pure play marketplace vendors, data pipeline vendors, data catalog vendors, and others. And then we want to manage the life cycle of this product. It's not a one and done thing like a project. It's, okay, we're going to build this and we're going to continue to iterate on it. So let's get customer feedback on it and bring that back into the product definition phase where we can create the next version of this product. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of how product management is a little different than project management. So I'll stop there, Jay.
Okay, we have a question about how can you handle sensitive data in self-service?
How can you handle? Well, that's where the data team really earns its money, right? And it has to work with the business users to understand who can access what, right? So once you understand those access roles, then you can have a better chance of making sure that people only see the data they're authorized to see, right? You are going to mask data, the sensitive data, when you want to give users access to data, except the sensitive part of that data, right? So you're going to mask the sensitive part, but have all the other data in the clear. So I think that's kind of my first take on that question. Jay, you may want to add something to that because you spent a lot of time in this.
Yeah, well, I think you basically said it. And somebody just made the similar comment. It kind of starts with role-based access controls.
Yeah.
Right. So there's two parts to that, which is the governance part, which is setting the policies over what roles can see what data, and then there's the enforcement of it, right, which is applying those policies automatically, essentially by recognizing who is asking for data and then giving them what they're allowed to see. I think, the newer products take it down a level to attribute-based access controls, which are more dynamic and can, say mask an email address for one role, but leave it in the clear for another based on governance rules. So I think, keeping up with the complexity in order to really make your data available for self-service, you need this ability to dynamically dial in the access capabilities of the person or the role asking for the data. It's not something you can do just with like a file structure, right? You have all access to all the stuff in this node of a tree, whether that's on a share or say, for example, in a reporting tool, which is often how they organize dashboards, right? So you get to see this everything that's in this folder, all the dashboards there, right? So it needs to go down a level, I think, at this point, given the risks involved with inappropriate use of sensitive data, but the opportunities of making it available in some form, right? So
yeah, and that is can be very challenging if you've got multiple users using multiple different types of tools, accessing various different types of data systems and databases. So we are starting to see the emergence of these data access platforms, data access management tools that kind of bridge all of your or most of your environment, right? So users kind of all go through this one engine, that's been configured by business users with these policies for who can access what. I know they're still maturing, but it seems like a promising way to go.
Actually, there's a question that I missed from when we were talking about operating models. So let me go back to that. Do you see the enterprise team as being in IT and or only possessing skills related to overall governance? Or should the enterprise have a specialized team that can do analytics and role model for the org?
Well, organizations can organize these teams in many different ways. Typically, we see the enterprise data team, data architects, data engineers, data governance. Well, maybe not data governance, or certainly data security. That's usually in IT. Doesn't have to be. I've seen it, reporting to the CFO, for instance, or COO, not the CIO. But it's oftentimes because they're engineers and architects, most companies lump them into IT. The BI or analytics teams oftentimes are not in IT. They can be, but sometimes they're split out and they report to somebody else, which makes it harder to align the blue and the purple. That's where they can get out of sync sometimes if they're not reporting to the same person. So in my ideal world, I like to see the enterprise data team and the enterprise BI and analytics team report to the same person, ideally who's not in IT, because IT comes in with their own prejudices and perceptions, and sometimes they rob and steal engineers from the data team for their own purposes. So I don't see that too often, right? And I know a lot of companies make it work when it's all part of IT, but I do like to see them reporting to the same person.
Yeah. We have another question here. Can enterprises that adopt a hybrid data fabric and data mesh strategies use the proposed operating model?
Yeah, I mean, this is the data mesh operating model in many ways. Yeah, because all your domain-based development is going to happen in the business domain, right? So these purple people are actually living inside of the domain, which is good and bad, right? It's good because they're much closer to the domain. They have that all-important domain knowledge. It's bad because they're further away from the enterprise team, and they could be creating products that no one can use because they don't sync up with anything, right? So the key thing in a data mesh is that when you move your development down into the red here, you have to have really strong standards and training and coaching and really strong governance to ensure what the domains are building actually aligns with what other domains are building and what's being done at the enterprise level.
All right, here's another one. What portion of the talent pool out there do you think understands these philosophies well, leaders, staff, versus how many still need to be taught? That's a good one.
Thankfully for us as consultants, seems like there's an unending need for information and advice along these lines. But yeah, it's It's always harder than you think, and some people don't realize that until they get into it, right? And they're in the middle of it, and then they can't see their way out of the trees to see the forest, so they need someone to come in and help them kind of see what's going on and move them in the right direction.
Yeah, I also think that you're swimming against a current of marketing hype that really makes managing expectations very, very difficult, and constantly educating and talking about what what the path is for a given organization. It, has to take into account their present state of maturity and tools and so forth, and how you can get to your more advanced mature state from where you are. It's not you can't just leapfrog from one side of the maturity curve over to the other. You have to kind of take your time traveling through the different stages. And that's not what's being sold out there kind of in the industry hype.
No. And I was going to say that the biggest misconception that's still out there, surprisingly still out there, because it was out there 30 years ago, is that a tool will solve your problem. And in this space, data analytics, you need tools, but they're not going to solve your problems, right? Your problems get solved from doing all these other things right? And tools really come at the end of the line. And the tools today are pretty darn good. So probably should spend less time figuring out what tools to use and more time figuring out how to do these other things right.
Yeah.
Since we're running out of time, I'll just finish the last two slides. So the right literacy, people think self-service is tools plus training. And, at the end of the line, yes, that's true. I think the training I think we're pretty good at this, to be honest with you, but it needs to be persona-based literacy program, right? Where you're teaching people to their needs, right? So here's a sample curriculum that I think we created for one client. And then the last is the tools. I think everyone knows that not every tool is good for every user, right? So you really have to understand which tools to give to which users. I mean, the biggest problem we saw like 10 years ago is that companies were just giving everyone Tableau, thinking that would solve their self-service problems. And, the data consumers, the 60%, didn't know what to do with Tableau, right? Even though they were trained, they forgot how to use it, and it was just too complicated for them. Even the data explorers had issues with it, right? But today, a lot of these tools have gotten pretty comprehensive, and they can support a lot of different roles and personas. So it's more an issue today that you got to figure out which functionality to turn on and off for each role or persona within your organization. Your data scientists will always use their own set of tools. Your data analysts probably will have lots of different tools that they're using. I'm starting to see those come together as a single platform, which maybe you call that a data fabric or data virtualization tool. That I think is a promising area to look into. And then obviously, to summarize, the real keys to self-service are know thy users first and foremost, know who you're serving, and then develop a data architecture that's really going to meet their needs and give them information in a seamless, frictionless way. Create an operating model that aligns all of your data and analytics resources across the organization. Create the right governance, because otherwise you'll have chaos and a Tower of Babel. Make that as lightweight as possible, but don't absolve the business from being involved and staying involved. The right product management and the right project management, the right literacy, and then finally the right tools. And then you'll have self-service and a data-driven organization. So that's the summary. I think Jay mentioned that we're at Eckerson Group, we're a boutique consultancy. It helps organizations get more value from data. We specialize in creating actionable data strategies. We do implementation, but actually we focus more on the strategy and design work for both commercial and nonprofit organizations. And all of the guys and gals in our organization, they all have 25 plus years of experience doing this. So they're all white hair, no hair, or whatever. So if you need or would like to explore any of these issues more, I'd be happy to chat with you. I think there's things on our website where you can set up a 30-minute call. These are some of the organizations that we've worked with in the recent past. So it's been a pleasure to talk with all of you. Thank you for your great comments and questions. And Jay, thank you for mediating this conversation with our audience. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. And if we can be of help, let us know. Contact me, wayne@eckerson.com. And otherwise, have a great rest of your day and a great weekend, too.
All right. Take care. Bye.